tried to tell you it happened. I said it years ago, and now look, every big streamer and even a bunch of small streamers are using cameras like this for their stream setups. And it's amazing the quality boost you get from adding a camera like this. I mean, take a look, just right here. You seen the difference? But the problem is you've never used a fancy schmancy camera like this one. You're a gamer, you're most likely not a videographer. So even though you shelled out the big bucks to add this to your stream, I wanna say the Sony A7 is like $500, $600, something like that. You might be only getting a fraction of the quality that you paid for. One of the huge advantages to streaming with a camera like this is you get the control. You control the aperture, you control the white balance. Those tiny little tweaks to the camera settings make a massive difference in your image quality. So whether you purchased a camera like this and you need help setting it up, or it's kind of on your next purchase list, or maybe it's just way in the future and you just want to know how much of a difference a camera would actually make like this, either way, we're gonna jump into all of that today. Welcome back to the Alpha Gaming channel. My name is Harris Heller. I am your stream doctor, and today we're gonna be finishing up the two-part series all about using the fancy camera on your stream. The last video was about choosing the right camera and lens. This video is all about all the fun stuff that comes after it arrives at your house. Let's do it. Before we get started, I want to give a huge thank you to the sponsor of today's video, Elgato Gaming, whose product is incredibly relevant to this video. If you're not familiar with the Elgato Camlink, it's the capture card that I mention in just about every single camera video. The Camlink is specifically designed for the express purpose of connecting any fancy camera to your stream. It's a fully capable capture card that captures in either 1080p 60 frames per second or 4K in 30 frames per second, but it's streamlined down into a little USB stick for capturing any kind of device that doesn't require an HDMI pass-through, like a camera or a mobile device, or even connecting your gaming PC to your streaming PC. With an MSRP of $129, it is a good chunk cheaper than a standard capture card. So if you're planning on upgrading your camera today, make sure you pick one up at the link down below. All right, let's move on to cameras. If you haven't noticed, by the way, I'm not 100% at the moment, so if something in my voice makes it very difficult for you to understand a sentence, we're gonna blame that on the phlegm. Yeah, gross. Also, if you missed part 1 of this series where I talk about how to choose a camera and a lens, I'm gonna link to that down below. But you've chosen your camera, you're ready to put this thing on a tripod, you want it to look as good as possible. Let's do it. First thing, you're gonna need to set this thing to manual mode. I know it's tempting to stick it in automatic mode and just forget the rest of this video, but manual is what allows you access to all the lighting changes that make a huge difference, including things like how blurry your background is, how little noise you have on your stream. So pull up your big boy pants or big girl pants, switch that thing to manual, and let's take a look at the numbers that you're now seeing on the bottom of the screen. You see them? There's a couple of them. Every camera has the same numbers. Let's get into setting those just right. Let's start from left to right. The very first number is the shutter speed. Now the shutter controls how long light is landing on the sensor in each frame. So you're probably streaming in 60 frames per second. Your camera should be outputting 60 little pictures every second, called frames. The longest you can set your shutter to be open in every single frame picking up an image is going to be 1/60th of a second. If you've got at least 8th grade math under your belt, you can verify that that's true. If you don't, you can just trust me on that one. Some cameras will show this as just a 60, some will show this as a 1/60 because that's actually what it is. It's the amount of seconds that the shutter is open in every frame. And that's exactly what we're gonna set this to. You want your shutter to be open for 1/60th of a second for every frame. And the shutter speed is gonna affect two things. First thing you'll notice is the longer the shutter is open, the more light it's allowed to capture in every single frame. So the brighter your image is gonna get. And that's the reason we're setting this to 60. You're probably streaming in a kind of a dark room. You wanna leave that shutter open as long as possible, letting as much natural light onto your sensor as possible. I think I said as possible twice in there. If not, I'm gonna cut this sentence out. Naturally, the other thing that a shutter speed affects is motion blur. So if someone's running across the frame and you leave the shutter open longer, it's gonna capture the movement much more and you're gonna get that motion, the blur of the motion. I feel like the rest is pretty self-explanatory. You getting what I'm saying? But because you're pretty much just sitting in front of your camera, either talking or playing video games, there's not really any motion blur to capture. So keeping your shutter open longer doesn't really hurt. Cool, step 1 is done. The next number is the aperture, and I talked about it a little bit in part 1, but the aperture is basically just how wide open the lens is. This one's really easy to set. Just set this number as low as your lens will go. The lower the number, the wider open the lens is, and just like shutter speed, that affects two things of the camera. One, just like shutter speed, how much light you're letting in onto your sensor, because the wider open that little peephole is, the more light can come through. The second thing it affects though is how shallow the depth of field is. The wider open that lens is, the more bokeh or shallow depth of field, that background blur you get, the more of that you get. That real nice like cinematic cinematic look. I think being sick is affecting my brain a little bit. Different lenses can open up wider. Nicer lenses can open up much wider than cheaper lenses. Open that thing all the way up, get more light on your sensor, and get that background blur that everybody wants. I feel like I'm gonna get the top of my head cut off here. Just a little bit. Let's just raise it up a little bit. Yeah, let's do that. Last number on the bottom, the ISO. This one, again, adjusts the brightness of the image. But unlike the last two that adjust how much light actually goes into the camera, this one's like a digital brightness. It's like, you know, sliding that brightness sensor on your phone when you try to edit photos. You ever crank that too high and you get all that noise in your photos? Basically, that's what we've been trying to avoid by setting the last two settings to as bright as possible. Because the brighter the ISO is, or the higher the number of the ISO is, the more noise you're introducing. So by brightening it up with the shutter speed and the aperture, now we can turn down the ISO. And essentially what you want to do here is just turn up and down the ISO to whatever looks the most natural on screen. And congrats to all of you that have gotten this far. That was the hardest part of this entire thing. Those last three numbers and learning to use them in like conjunction with each other and know how they interact with each other is like 90 to 100% of getting the right shot. You're now an accomplished videographer. I mean, I wouldn't go tell a professional that you're good at it, but like, you now know more than most people. Let's move on to the last couple tweaks we need to do. White balance. White balance you'll probably find in your quick settings. You can also find it somewhere in the settings of your camera. Usually the setting is set to auto for most cameras, and most people will just leave it on auto, but sometimes you get like a blue wall behind you that your camera's trying to compensate for, and within a couple minutes your face can go from looking like Twilight to looking like Jersey Shore. Basically find your white balance setting, set it to custom, and then it's gonna allow you to adjust the temperature. And all you need to do is crank it back and forth until your face looks a natural color. You can even add in a tiny bit more tan if you want. Not a big deal. Either way, if you set this yourself, you're not gonna have to worry about the camera switching between blue and orange the entire time you're streaming. By the way, your brain does this too. If you've ever gone skiing and you got like those goggles that have like a little bit of an orange shade to them, and you ski all day or maybe a couple hours in them, then you get back and you pull them off and suddenly the entire world just looks bright blue. If any of you have ever gone skiing, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That is your brain white balancing to compensate for that orange filter that you're looking through. That's what your camera's doing. Next one, autofocus. This one's kind of up to you, actually. I like to keep the autofocus turned off on my cameras while I'm streaming because I'm usually kind of in the same spot. I don't move around a ton, and I don't like that like wow, like weird like focus blur that goes in and out when it loses sight of your face and it's trying to focus. You know exactly what I'm talking about. But you should know that if you plan on keeping autofocus on your stream, you should probably go with a Sony. A lot of the lower end Canon DSLRs, when you turn on autofocus, it sends that little white autofocus rectangle through the HDMI and it'll get picked up in your stream. I don't know why they keep that in there. Personally, I like to find the perfect focus distance on my lens and then just leave it there. So I know that if I'm standing in this spot, I'm in focus. All right, let's finish up. The last thing you need to set, make sure your camera's set to 60 frames per second, 1080p. Also make sure your runtime is set to unlimited. This is gonna be a little different for every camera. You might have to do some Googling, but as long as you can do that so your camera doesn't shut down midstream, you're set to go. That's everything. You've got a dope looking stream. How does it feel? Does it feel good? You feel like a professional on Twitch now? Because you should. Now you can go to all your friends and be like, hey, look at me. I'm a camera professional. I mean, make sure that none of them are like actual like videographers. But if none of your friends are photographers, you can be like, hey, look at me. I know what I'm doing. And I said it before, but I'll say it again. This is literally like, if you know these settings, this is like 90% of using a camera. You can go out, you can vlog, you can shoot some cinematic stuff. I mean, editing is a whole different story. I feel like I should do a video on editing, but man, that would be more than a part 2 series. Maybe one day when I'm running out of video ideas, I'll do like a whole editing series. Anyway, I hope this helped, guys. Let me know if you have any other questions below. Make sure you hit that like button if you found this informative, and hit the subscribe button. Also, I do go live on Twitch every Monday, Wednesday, Friday about 6:30 Pacific time, so feel free to jump in there with any other questions you have. Link down below. And as always, happy streaming.
Yeah.
No, we gotta film a video before child 3 wakes up from her nap.
It tastes like chicken.
What are you doing over there?